In this video, we are continuing with question 5, which covers macroeconomics of May-June 2024, past economics paper 1. So this is the grade 12 exam, so it is going to help you in preparation of May-June 2025 paper, which you are writing tomorrow. Now, let us see where we ended off from the previous video. If you haven't seen the previous video, please take an opportunity and go look at the previous video. Our previous video covers the first part, which obviously was the policies. So we're looking at fiscal policy as well as monetary policy. So please start with the previous video before you start looking at this one. And the reason for doing that is to ensure that you get the full benefit of this question, which is question number 5. Just to recap, the question was discuss in detail the new economic paradigm in smoothing out business cycle. So what does that mean in simple terms is how can the business activity be improved? Obviously, the business activities can be improved through the supply side policy and also the demand side policy. And then the second question was how can the increase in economic activity impact on business? Now that you understand how the economic activities can be increased or improved, now you need to respond to how does that improvement or increase in economic activity impact on business. As I've already stated in the previous video, we covered the first part of our solution. Now we are moving to the next part. So what are we going to be looking in this part? So you will recall that the part that we covered the entire essay in terms of what you should know. You should have introduction, the body, and the conclusion. And I discussed in detail that in the previous video. We went through the demand side and we covered the monetary policy as well as the fiscal policy. Now, what are we doing? Now we're going to be moving to effects of demand side and supply side policy in the new economic paradigm using the graph. So you need to understand how to draw this graph, as well as you also need to understand how to explain it. You'll get the marks for explaining the graph, plus you'll get the mark for also being able to comment on the graph. Now let us look at this graph. So what do you need to know? You need to know your y-axis, your x-axis, as well as your y-axis. And then you need to know that you need to have your aggregate supply, the movement in aggregate supply, aggregate demand, and the movement in aggregate demand. So once you've grown this graph and you understand this graph, you need to explain the movement. So this is the initial equilibrium. When we're looking at E, we are looking at the initial equilibrium. So the price is constant at P and the quantity is also constant at P. Then in the short run, it is believed that the supply, the aggregate supply, does not change in the short run. However, the demand change. So if we're looking at the change in demand from AD1, aggregate demand 1, to aggregate demand to aggregate demand 1, there is a shift. So that shift, it results to an increase in price and the subsequent, in quantity and the subsequent increase in price. Now it is believed then, in the long run, the expectation is that the aggregate supply will change. So now what we see happening, we see the aggregate supply also, what is it doing? It is shifting. That means it is increasing. Now, when we're looking at the aggregate supply shifting, we are then moving to E2, equilibrium 2. So what is happening in equilibrium 2? The price remains the same, however, the quantity increase. So we're at the point where the price remains the same, however, the quantity increase. So what is important when you are looking at this graph? First, you need to understand your axis. You need to understand how to explain the graph. And you need to have both your aggregate supply, the movement in aggregate supply, aggregate demand, as well as the movement in aggregate demand. Now, let us look in detail in terms of how the marks get allocated when it comes to the graphs. In terms of the marks, for labeling the x's, you'd get 1 mark each. 1 mark for your x-axis and 1 mark for your y-axis. So you need to understand that your y-axis, it is the price, as well as your x-axis, it is the output. Just for labeling, you'll get the marks. So labeling the caps, which is this one, having AS, AS1, AD, AD1, you get another mark. Shifting AD and AS, that means you are shifting from AD to AD1 or AS, and AS and AS1, you get 2 marks. So you get a total of 4 marks just for drawing without even explaining the graph. So you need to know how to draw this graph. Now let's just look at the explanation. Aggregate demand and supply are in equilibrium at point E, where AD and AS on AD and AS. So we are in equilibrium here, as I've already explained. More real output is produced without any price increase if aggregate demand shift to AD from AD to AD1, while the aggregate supply rotate to AS1. So where is that? It is here, where the price stay the same, but the quantity move. So what caused that? It only happens if there is a shift in both the demand as well as the supply. An increase in aggregate demand to do AD1 while aggregate supply remains the same will form a new equilibrium at point E1. I've explained to you in the short run, the supply is expected to stay the same. However, the demand move. So if it happens that the supply has stayed the same and the demand has moved, we will move to the equilibrium E1. Real output increase from Q to Q1, but the general price level also increase from P to P1, leading to inflation. So now if there's an increase in demand with no relative increase in supply, we're gonna find the country in the inflation. And the reason for that is because the price will go up. And when does the price go up? When there is a increase in demand with no change in supply. The solution is to implement supply side measures such as skilled development to ensure the supply is more flexible. So what happened now to ensure that the issue of inflation is monitored is to apply the supply side measures. Through what? Skill development to ensure the supply is more flexible. The demand side policy are effective in stimulating economic growth by increasing aggregate demand during economic recession. When the demand side policy is effective to ensure that the country get out of recession. And why does the country get out of recession if there are more quantity produced? It is because there will be more employment, people will have money, and then they will be able to do what? To buy the goods from the shop. If there are more people are buying goods from the shop, it subsequently then mean we're gonna have an issue where the producers are saying there is more demand and they want to up the price or increase the price. Then economic growth increases the demand for labor and reduces unemployment. As I've already stated, if there's an increase in the quantity produced, that means more laborers will be used and the unemployment will then decrease. The unemployment falls, inflation start to rise, as illustrated in the Phillips curve. So the Phillips curve explains the inflation and the unemployment. So as the unemployment decrease, meaning to say more people are employed in the economy, there will be an issue of inflation, or it will trigger inflation. And the reason the inflation is triggered, it is based on the fact that more people are working and they have money. So if you have money, what do? You go to the shops and buy the products that you need or product that you crave for. It is for that reason that in the Phillips curve, we will be explaining the relationship between unemployment and the inflation. And you need to understand the relationship before you go to the exam, because it is very important for you to understand why in the Phillips curve we see this relationship of inflation and the unemployment. Now, let us look at the Phillips curve. Now, let us look at the Phillips curve and explain it. I've already stated to you that the Phillips curve shows the relationship between unemployment rate as well as the inflation, right? And I've explained to you in the Phillips curve, you'll see that if there's an increase in unemployment, there will be a reduction in inflation rate. Opposite to that, if the unemployment is reduced, meaning more people are working, the inflation will increase. And the reason for that is because people will have more money to buy the products they want or to get the service they want. For that reason, you're going to find the shift in the Phillips curve. However, there will be situation where, like D, where the unemployment rate goes down. However, there's no change in inflation. So that happens obviously if the more skilled people that are employed, and so we're going to look at that in detail as well. So now, first thing first, the Phillips curve, by just drawing, remembering how it looks like, you will get 4 marks. How are you going to get that 4 marks? By labeling the x-axis 1 mark, labeling y-axis 1 mark, labeling of the curves 1 mark, labeling of an axis 1 mark. So now what does that mean? By labeling these curves, PC1 and PC, you get a mark. By having this unemployment rate and inflation rate, 1 mark, right? So it is important for you to understand how you get those marks, right? And then now let us look at the explanation and how this graph works. I've already briefed you, but I want us to look into details together. The Phillips curve shows the negative or inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. How do you see that? Because if you are moving from here, from A to B, what does it happen? If the unemployment rate moves from 14 to 10, there is an increase in inflation. There is an inverse relationship between the two. Now let's go further. PC shows the initial situation at point A, where PC curve intersects the original or the horizontal axis. So that is here. Point A shows natural rate of unemployment of 14%, which is the level of unemployment that causes no pressure on wages and therefore has no inflationary effects. At levels of unemployment below point A, which is below 14%, inflation starts to increase. That's when we are moving from here to here, A to B. Now the inflation do what? Increases. And then we can see the inflation increase to 2%. A further decrease in unemployment, that is to 8%. We move even further to 6%. By reducing from 14 to 18, the unemployment rate, we see the inflation increasing from 0 to 6%. Supply side measures can be used to relocate the Phillips curve forwards through PC to PC1. Obviously, when we put the supply side measures, we are moving PC to PC1. And then what happens? In natural employment decrease from 14 at point A to 9 at point D without provoking inflation. Again, there are measures that can be put to ensure that the reduction in unemployment does not trigger inflation rate. Demand can be stimulated to high levels before an increase in unemployment have an effect on inflation rate. So that is where we are looking at point D. The supply side policies, a demand side approach does not render a desirable outcome because growth has to be cut down to problems of inflation. Output supply needs to be managed to achieve greater output by focusing on increased flexibility of supply component. The government can support suppliers in a way that will allow them to respond to the changes in the demand. Reduction in the cost allows greater output to be supplied at any given price level. So now what then government can do to increase that is increase in the activities or in the economic activities. What can be done? A reduction in the cost of infrastructure services such as communication, transport, and energy cost. How then government can contribute to that? By reducing maybe the prices of the cost of going to certain towns or location of the transport that they provide, which are trains. We know that government through Transnet they provide trains, and by providing trains, it means they have control in the price they bill people who use trains to go to work. Administration cost. They can reduce the administration cost to the business, that is inspection and regulation, which add the cost to the business. By doing so, they'll reduce cost to the business and the business will be able to produce more. And then also cash incentives such as subsidies to ensure that they lower production for the producers. And then if the production cost is lowered, the producers are able to employ more workers. By employing more workers, more people will be employed and more economic activities will happen through them using their money to buy whatever they want. Competition of exporters. Government can find a way to assist or subsidize the exporters in order to ensure that they increase the sale they make to the foreign market. What else can be done to increase economic activity or boost the economic activity of the country to pull the country out of recession? The measures of improved efficiency of input can be done. How that can be done? Through low rates of personal income tax, replacing of capital goods through to ensure that the company remain competitive or they are up to date with the technological developments. So what does that mean to you? It simply means that if the company is replacing the machine they are using on a regular basis to be up to date with technology, they will be producing the products at a high speed than they would if they didn't replace the old machine. So in that way, they remain competitive and they can produce the product at a lower cost and very quick. The trainings. By providing trainings, the healthy care and educates the employees, the quality of labor who will produce better results or better outcome when they're producing service or products will result into the efficiency in the input. And then free advisory services. When a free advisory service required, that means the free advisory service will be available in the places that requires certain skills that can be funded by government or in different ways. People can volunteer to say, I want to volunteer for this advisory service in this industry. In that way, they will be reducing on the cost that they would have paid out. And then by reducing to the cost that they would have paid out. So what does that mean? Because you need to understand what that simply means by reducing on the cost that they would have paid out. It means that they can produce more with the excess money they have and they can employ more workers. Do you understand the connection? So you need to understand the connection in economics of labor, the output, and the excess money. And by doing so, you stand a better chance of passing and doing well in economics. Now, what are the other measures? Measures to improve efficiency of market. How that is done. Deregulations where laws and regulations are removed to improve flexibility in the market. We know some industry are heavily regulated and the regulations are costly to comply with. By taking out those regulation, the cost or the money that is paid to those or for the compliance of those regulations will be available. And when that is available, it can be used or employed to ensure that more product is made to be sold and more labor is employed to create or sell the product. What else can be done? Competition is encouraged to promote establishment of the new business and even inviting the foreign market for investment. It will have to remove power of imbalance because we know that if the competition is low, the producers in the market, they are taking a lot of money, or their price of products becomes very expensive. If their product is very expensive, people are not able to buy more of the products, but they can only buy less, and they are not able to spend the money on the other products. Now, let us make an example, because by making this example, it will enable you to understand if the competition is increased, it helps a lot. It helps a lot because now the suppliers will charge the price that is competitive. And the competitive price will be lower than the general price that it will charge where there are very few players or very few suppliers. And what does it mean for consumers? It means that the consumers are then able to go and say, I have 50 rand. In this 50 rand, if it was only Ayanda that was selling the product, Ayanda was going to take the full 50 rand for this product. However, because there is Ayanda, there is Simpiwe, and there's Sitle, they are now charging 30 rand. I'm going to have 20 rand extra, and that 20 rand I can use for other products. That helps to improve efficiency in the market. And then what else can be done? Leveling the playing field through privatization to allow private business to compete with the public enterprises. In the issues like ESCOM, ESCOM, they keep on increasing the price. And you cannot say you're not going to use electricity. So now if we can have the private sectors producing the very same electricity as ESCOM, what does that mean? The price will drop and then the consumers will have more money. So that is why it is very important that there are measures to improve the efficiency in the market. So this will be the last part of this video. The last part of question 5 will be on the separate video. Please follow me on the separate video to look at the impact of the increase in economic activity on the business. Thank you so much and all the best for tomorrow.